Snow lashes across Duluth. On a frozen roadside, a woman with one leg stands against the storm, calling a name the wind refuses to return. Her hands are numb, her breath is breaking, and somewhere in the white silence, a German shepherd she's loved for 15 years is missing. A city security SUV slows. Inside it, a former police officer who thought his days of choosing danger were over makes a decision that will change 3 lives. Because this night isn't about a storm. It's about what happens when someone refuses to look away. One door will open, one choice will be made, and a quiet miracle will remind us that God doesn't always stop the storm. Sometimes he sends help through a stranger who stays. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe no one, human or animal, should ever face the night alone, subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope today. Winter had settled deep into Duluth, Minnesota. By this time of year, snow was part of daily life. Sidewalks narrowed, roofs stayed white, and the wind off Lake Superior never fully rested. People learned to move slower, to dress heavier, to expect delays. But some nights went beyond routine, and this was one of them. The storm came quickly. Snow blew hard across the streets, pushed sideways by wind that cut between buildings and along empty roads. Lane markings disappeared under fresh drifts. Streetlights shone through the snowfall, dull and unfocused. Most cars had already pulled off for the night, leaving the city quiet except for the sound of wind and snow scraping against metal and concrete. Ethan Hale drove alone through it. He guided a city security SUV at a careful pace, both hands steady on the wheel. At 42, Ethan was tall and solid, his body shaped by years of long shifts rather than comfort. His dark hair was cut short, threaded with gray at the temples. A trimmed beard followed the firm line of his jaw. His face rarely showed much emotion, not because he lacked it, but because he had learned when expression served no purpose. His eyes stayed on the road, focused and alert. Ethan had spent most of his adult life as a police officer in Duluth. 15 years of winter calls, late nights, and quiet emergencies had taught him how quickly ordinary moments could change. He learned how to read tension before it spoke, how to keep his voice steady when others couldn't. He also learned that no amount of experience could prevent every loss. The night his partner was killed hadn't been dramatic. No chase, no warning, just a single moment that couldn't be taken back. After that, Ethan stayed on long enough to finish his duty with respect. He testified, trained younger officers, followed procedure, but something inside him wore thin. When early retirement became an option, he accepted it without debate. Now he worked night security for the city. Storm patrols, welfare checks, roads like this one. The radio crackled softly. Unit 12, confirm location. North side, Ethan replied evenly. Visibility's poor. Copy, dispatch said. That was Sarah Quill. Calm, precise, the kind of dispatcher who knew when to trust silence. Take it slow. I am, Ethan said. He eased forward, headlights cutting narrow paths through the snow. That was when he noticed movement ahead. At first, it looked like a shadow shifting near the curb. Then the shape separated from the storm. A young woman stood at the edge of the road, leaning on a pair of forearm crutches. She faced the trees, not the street, as if she wasn't waiting for help. Snow clung to her long navy coat, darkening the fabric. A knit hat was pulled low over auburn hair, loose strands frozen against her cheeks. She was slim, but the way she stood showed effort and control, not weakness. As Ethan slowed, the reason became clear. Her right leg was gone above the knee. The loss wasn't recent. There was no hesitation in her balance, no panic in her movements. This was someone who knew exactly how to hold herself upright. Still, the cold was taking its toll. Her hands were red around the crutch grips. Her breathing was short and shallow. She turned toward the trees and called out, "Rowan!" The wind carried the name away. She tried again, louder, her voice rough with strain. "Rowan!" Nothing answered, only snow and dark branches bending under its weight. Ethan pulled over and put the SUV in park. He watched her for a moment through the windshield. She didn't turn around. She didn't signal for help. She just stood there, as if walking away wasn't an option she allowed herself. Ethan stepped out into the storm. Cold hit his face immediately. Snow stung his eyes. He closed the door behind him and walked toward her at an angle, slow enough not to startle her. "Ma'am," he called, "you shouldn't be out here." She turned quickly, crutches pressing into the snow, her eyes locked onto him. Green-gray, alert, guarded. Up close, she looked to be in her late 20s. Freckles dotted her pale skin. Exhaustion showed clearly, but fear did not. "I'm fine," she said. They both knew she wasn't. Ethan lifted one hand, palm open. "I'm not here to cause trouble. My name's Ethan, city security." Her gaze flicked briefly toward the SUV, then back. "I'm not lost." "Then why are you standing in a blizzard?" he asked calmly. She hesitated, then spoke. "My dog." She nodded toward the trees. "He ran." "What's his name?" Ethan asked. "Rowan, German shepherd." Her voice tightened. "He's afraid of thunder." There was a loud crack and he bolted. Ethan followed her gaze into the snow. He recognized that tone. It wasn't just worry, it was attachment. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore." "All right, Clara," Ethan said. "You're freezing." "I don't care," she replied, then quieter. "I can't leave him." Ethan studied her face, the firm set of her jaw, the way she held her ground against the wind. "We'll look for him," Ethan said, "but not like this." She shook her head. "He won't come if I'm not close." "We'll stay close," he said, "but you need to warm up first." Another gust cut through them. Her shoulders trembled. Finally, she nodded once. Ethan opened the passenger door. Warm air spilled into the night. Clara climbed in carefully, her crutches scraping the floorboard. Before he closed the door, she leaned out and called Rowan's name one last time. The storm gave no answer. Ethan shut the door gently and returned to the driver's seat. Snow pressed against the windshield, steady and uncaring. Somewhere beyond the headlights, a frightened dog was lost in the white, and Ethan knew he wasn't driving away. The search had begun. The heater worked hard against the cold, pushing warm air into the cab of the SUV in uneven waves. It fogged the windshield almost immediately, and Ethan reached up to clear a narrow patch with the edge of his glove before adjusting the defroster. Outside, the storm pressed close, flattening the world into shifting white. Inside, the silence felt heavy but contained, like the pause before movement. Clara sat rigid in the passenger seat, her shoulders hunched inside her soaked coat. She hadn't taken off her hat. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers curled stiffly, as if letting go of tension might cause something else to collapse. Her breathing had slowed, but her eyes stayed fixed on the side window, tracking the trees as they slid past in dark blurs. Ethan noticed everything without staring. He had learned long ago how to observe without intruding. He reached behind his seat, pulled out a folded thermal blanket, and held it out to her without comment. "Wrap this around your legs," he said. "You'll warm faster." Clara hesitated, then took it. Her hands trembled slightly as she spread the blanket over herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words sounded practiced, like something she used often, but never lingered on. Ethan eased the SUV back onto the road. He didn't drive fast. He followed the path of the footprints he'd seen earlier until they disappeared under fresh snow, then slowed even more, scanning the shoulders, the gaps between trees, anywhere a large dog might have broken through. "How long ago did he run?" he asked. "Maybe 20 minutes, Clara said. "Maybe longer. Time feels strange when you're shouting into the wind." She swallowed. "He usually comes back when I call. Always has." Ethan nodded. He didn't offer reassurance he couldn't guarantee. "Older dogs can get turned around in storms like this," he said. "Doesn't mean he won't find his way." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if measuring the difference between comfort and honesty. "You don't sound like you're lying." "I'm not," Ethan said. They drove in silence for another block. Snow slapped against the side of the vehicle. A fallen branch lay half-buried near the curb, and Ethan steered around it carefully. Clara's voice broke the quiet. "He's 15, she said. "Rowan, I mean. He's been with me since I was a kid." Ethan glanced at her briefly, then back to the road. "That's a long time." "He was my father's idea," she continued. "He said if the world was going to take something from me, I should have something that stayed." She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but didn't quite make it there. "Rowan stayed." The words settled between them. Ethan felt the weight of them without fully understanding their shape yet. He turned the SUV onto a side street that led closer to a wooded trailhead, its entrance marked by a sign nearly buried in snow. "I'm going to park here," he said. "We'll check on foot for a few minutes. Not far. I don't want you overdoing it." "I can manage," Clara said immediately. "I know," Ethan replied. "That's why I'm setting limits." She pressed her lips together, but didn't argue. He pulled into a small lot already half filled with drifts and killed the engine. The sudden quiet was startling. Without the hum of the motor, the storm sounded closer, louder, like something alive. Ethan stepped out first, the cold biting again at his face. He moved around to Clara's side and opened the door. "Take your time," he said. She swung herself carefully down, crutches sinking slightly into the snow. Ethan watched the way she adjusted her balance, efficient and practiced, her movements economical. This wasn't new to her. Pain, maybe. Difficulty, certainly, but not uncertainty. They moved slowly toward the tree line. Ethan kept his flashlight low, sweeping the ground rather than the air. Dog tracks were harder to see now, but occasionally a deeper impression showed where something heavy had passed through. "Rowan," Clara called softly. She didn't shout anymore. Her voice carried less force but more intention. "Hey boy, it's okay." The beam of Ethan's light caught on something dark ahead. He raised a hand slightly. "Hold on." They stepped closer. It was a torn piece of nylon caught on a low branch. Ethan reached out, brushed snow aside. "This looks like part of a collar," he said. Clara sucked in a breath. "That's his," she said immediately. "The blue one. It tore last year and I never replaced it." Ethan folded the scrap and handed it to her. She closed her fingers around it like it might disappear. "That means he came through here," Ethan said. "And he kept moving." "Which way?" she asked. Ethan studied the ground, the angle of the broken brush, toward the trail, or the ravine beyond it. Her face tightened. "There's a drop there." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why we don't rush." They followed the trail only a short distance before the snow deepened enough to slow Clara's pace. Her breathing grew heavier, her grip tighter on the crutches. "That's far enough," Ethan said gently. "I'm going to go a little ahead. You stay right here." "I don't like that," she said. "I don't either," he replied. "But I'll stay within sight." She hesitated, then nodded. 2 minutes, she said. "Then I'm moving." "Fair," Ethan said. He stepped forward alone, boots crunching softly. He moved carefully, scanning ahead, listening between gusts. For a moment, there was nothing but wind. Then he heard it. A low sound, not a bark, more like a strained whine, cut short by the storm. Ethan stopped. He angled his light downward toward a shallow dip off the trail. "Rowan," he called, firm but calm. The sound came again, clearer now. Ethan crouched and followed it down a short incline. At the bottom, partially shielded by fallen brush, was a large German shepherd. His coat was thick and dark, matted with snow. His ears were pinned back, eyes alert but tired. One hind leg was trapped awkwardly beneath a fallen limb. "It's okay," Ethan said quietly. "You're all right." The dog didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He watched Ethan closely, breathing hard, pain evident but controlled. This was an older animal, disciplined by years of trust. Ethan radioed back without raising his voice. "Clara, I found him. He's alive." Her reply came instantly, tight with relief. "I'm coming." "Stay where you are," Ethan said. "I'll bring him up." He worked carefully, lifting the branch just enough to free the dog's leg. Rowan yelped once, then stilled. Ethan slid his arm beneath the dog's chest, supporting his weight. "Good boy," he murmured. "Almost done." Rowan allowed himself to be helped, though every movement cost him. When Ethan guided him up the incline, Clara was already there, having ignored the limit by exactly 30 seconds. She dropped to one knee, crutches forgotten, and wrapped her arms around Rowan's neck. The dog leaned into her immediately, tail thumping weakly against the snow. "You scared me," she whispered into his fur. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't cry loudly. She pressed her forehead against his. "You're okay. You're okay." Ethan watched them quietly. He felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized was tight. They returned to the SUV slowly, Ethan supporting Rowan's other side. Once inside, Ethan cleared space in the back seat and helped the dog settle across the blanket. Rowan lay still, head resting on Clara's thigh as she climbed in beside him. Ethan started the engine and turned the heater higher. "We're going to a vet," he said. "I know one that stays open during storms." Clara nodded, stroking Rowan's fur. "Thank you," she said. This time, the words stayed. As the SUV pulled away from the trailhead, the storm continued to rage, unchanged. But inside the vehicle, something had shifted. 3 lives moved together now through the white, bound by the simple decision not to leave one behind. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, a low brick building with a single illuminated sign fighting against the snow. The parking lot was half buried, tire tracks already filling in as the storm worked to erase evidence of movement. Ethan pulled the SUV into the closest clear space and cut the engine. For a moment, none of them moved. Rowan lay stretched across the back seat, his breathing slow but uneven. His dark coat was damp and tangled with snow, his large frame tense in a way that spoke of pain carefully endured rather than panic. One ear twitched at the sudden quiet, but he didn't lift his head. Clara sat beside him, one hand resting on his neck, fingers moving in a steady rhythm she had clearly practiced over many years. "He hates places like this," she said softly, as if apologizing to the dog before anyone else. "Bright lights, strange smells." Ethan nodded. "He'll get through it." He stepped out first, moving around to the back to open the door and clear space. As he did, the clinic door swung open and a woman emerged, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. She was in her early 50s, medium height, sturdy in build, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled into a low ponytail. Her face held lines carved by long hours and responsibility rather than age. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, but not unkind. "That'll be Rowan," she said, already moving closer. Her voice was calm and confident, the kind that didn't waste words. "I'm Dr. Helen Moore." Ethan recognized the name. Helen Moore had worked storms in Duluth longer than most. She ran the clinic with discipline and compassion in equal measure, known for staying open when others closed. "He's trapped his hind leg," Ethan said. "Older dog, 15. Helen crouched carefully, shining a small light along Rowan's leg. "You did the right thing bringing him in quickly," she said. "Let's get him inside before the cold stiffens him further." They moved as a unit, practiced without having rehearsed it. Ethan supported Rowan's weight from behind while Helen guided his front. Clara followed closely, crutches clicking against the tile as they entered the clinic. The air inside smelled of antiseptic and wet fur. It was warm, almost too warm after the cold, and Clara's shoulders sagged slightly as the heat reached her. Helen led them to an exam room and helped Rowan onto the table with careful hands. The dog whined once, low and brief, then stilled when Clara pressed her forehead against his. "I'm right here," she whispered. "You're not alone." Helen glanced at Clara. "You've done this before." Clara nodded. "More times than I wanted." Helen's mouth softened at the edges. "You can stay as long as you like. Just don't let him see your fear. Dogs notice that." Clara straightened, drawing in a slow breath. Ethan watched the shift, how she adjusted herself, the way she made space for strength even when it cost her. Helen worked efficiently, checking Rowan's leg, his joints, his breathing. "No break," she said after a few minutes. "Bad strain, some bruising. He's lucky. At his age, this could have been much worse." Clara's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "He always is," she said quietly. Ethan leaned back against the wall, arms crossed loosely. He felt out of place here, like a visitor who hadn't planned on staying. Clinics reminded him of waiting rooms, of long nights that ended with news you didn't want to hear. He pushed the thought aside. Helen finished wrapping Rowan's leg and administered a mild sedative. "He'll be sore," she said, "but he'll recover. You'll need to keep him warm and limit his movement for a while." Clara nodded, committing every word to memory. As Helen stepped out to prepare paperwork, the room grew quiet. Rowan's breathing evened out, his eyes closing as exhaustion took hold. Clara sank into the chair beside the table, the effort of holding herself together finally catching up to her. Ethan broke the silence. "You didn't hesitate back there," he said. "Most people would have frozen." Clara smiled faintly. "I don't freeze well." He studied her profile, the tired lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped only now that the danger had passed. "You mentioned your father earlier," he said carefully. She nodded. "He taught me how to read storms. Said they don't ask permission, so you don't wait for them to be polite." "That sounds like him," Ethan said, surprising himself. She looked at him then. "You sound like someone who's listened to that advice before." Ethan didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I've stood in a few storms." Helen returned with paperwork and a mug of coffee. She handed to Clara without asking. "You look like you could use it," she said. "Thank you," Clara replied, wrapping both hands around the cup. Helen turned to Ethan. "You staying with her?" "For now," he said. Helen studied him briefly, then nodded. Good. Roads will get worse before they get better. They waited until Rowan was stable enough to move. Ethan settled him gently back into the SUV, laying extra blankets beneath him. Clara climbed in beside him, exhaustion finally visible in the way her head leaned briefly against the seat. As Ethan pulled away from the clinic, the storm showed no sign of easing. But the drive felt different, less frantic, more deliberate. The danger had shifted from immediate to manageable. You didn't have to do all this, Clara said after a while. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. I know. Then why did you? He thought about that, about Mark, about nights he'd driven past trouble because it wasn't his assignment anymore, about the weight he'd felt lifting Rowan from the snow. Because sometimes, he said, walking away costs more. They drove in silence after that. Ethan pulled into his driveway just past midnight. The small house sat dark against the storm, lights off, snow piling against the porch steps. He parked and cut the engine. You can stay, he said simply, both of you, at least until the storm passes. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Just until Rowan's steady. That's fine. They moved carefully inside. Ethan lit the lamp, the warm glow revealing a modest space, clean, sparse, lived in but not decorated. He set Rowan up near the heater, adjusting blankets until the dog settled with a long, tired sigh. Clara watched closely, then finally allowed herself to sit. Outside, the storm continued its work. Inside, the house held. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, looking at the two of them. For the first time that night, he felt the storm had given something back instead of only taking. And for now, that was enough. The house did not feel abandoned, but it did not feel welcoming either. It stood back from the road, modest and square, its siding dulled by years of winter wind. Snow had gathered unevenly along the porch steps, and the railing bore the small scars of salt and ice scraped away season after season. When Ethan turned the key and pushed the door open, the hinges creaked softly, not in complaint, but in acknowledgement, as if the house were used to being entered without ceremony. Warmth moved slowly through the rooms. The heater worked steadily, but this was a place that held on to cold, not out of neglect, but habit. Ethan flipped on a lamp in the living room. The light revealed simple furniture arranged for use rather than appearance. A worn sofa, a low table marked with old scratches, a single armchair angled toward a window that now showed nothing but white. No photographs lined the walls, no decorations softened the corners. The house reflected its owner, functional, contained, careful not to promise more than it could give. Ethan set Rowan down on a thick blanket near the heater. The dog shifted once, then settled, letting out a long breath that sounded like surrender rather than exhaustion. His dark eyes half closed, but he stayed alert enough to track Clara as she moved. She lowered herself carefully to the floor beside him, one knee bent, the other leg folded beneath her in a practiced motion that spared strain. She rested her hand on Rowan's shoulder, fingers sinking into familiar fur. It's quiet, she said, not as a compliment or a complaint, but as an observation. It usually is, Ethan replied. He removed his jacket and hung it on a hook by the door, then paused, as if considering whether to say more. He didn't. He rarely filled silence just to make it disappear. Clara shrugged off her coat with effort, revealing a thick sweater beneath. Her movements were slower now, fatigue finally overtaking urgency. The storm had taken more out of her than she had admitted. Ethan noticed the way her shoulders sagged once the coat was off, the way her breath deepened now that she was no longer bracing against cold. There's a bathroom down the hall, he said. Towels are in the cabinet. You should warm up. She nodded. Just a minute. Ethan went into the kitchen, a narrow space with clean counters and little clutter. He filled a kettle and set it on the stove, the familiar routine grounding him. He moved with efficiency, but without hurry, the way he did everything when there was no longer an emergency demanding speed. Clara watched him from the living room, the quiet giving her room to notice details. The way he favored his left shoulder slightly when he reached, the faint scar along his knuckle, the absence of personal objects that suggested a life pared down to essentials. This was not a man who expected company. Rowan shifted and let out a soft sound. Clara leaned closer. You're safe, she whispered. You hear me? We're safe for now. The kettle began to whistle. Ethan poured hot water into 2 mugs and dropped tea bags in without asking what she preferred. He carried one back and set it within reach. Careful, he said. It's hot. Thank you, Clara replied. This time her voice carried weight. She wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth spread into her fingers. A faint tremor ran through her, then eased. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the heater and the distant wind pressing against the house. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. Snow struck the windows in irregular patterns, as if testing for weaknesses. Ethan spoke first. "You said Rowan's been with you since you were a kid." "Yes," Clara said. She stared into the steam rising from her mug. "Since I was 12. That caught his attention. "That's a long time," she nodded. "The storm that took my family happened that winter. Another blizzard, different place, same kind of night." She didn't look at him when she said it. The words came out flat, practiced, as if she had learned how to say them without letting them cut too deep. "I survived. My parents didn't. My younger brother didn't either." Ethan said nothing. He knew better than to rush grief. He waited. "My leg," she continued, tapping her knee lightly, "was crushed when the car slid. They couldn't save it." She paused. "Rowan was given to me afterward. My father had already planned it. Said I needed something steady if I was going to learn how to stand again." Ethan felt the weight of that settle. He looked at the dog lying between them, breathing evenly now, and understood why Clara had walked into a blizzard without hesitation. "He stayed," she said quietly, "when everything else changed." Ethan leaned back against the armchair. "Loyalty like that isn't trained," he said. "It's built." She glanced at him. "You sound like someone who knows." He considered deflecting, then didn't. "I worked with a partner for 12 years, he said. "You learn to read each other without talking. You trust that if something goes wrong, the other person will be there." "What happened?" she asked gently. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "He didn't come home one night." She nodded. No surprise, no pity, just understanding. The kettle clicked off as it cooled. Time passed without either of them measuring it. Eventually, Clara pushed herself upright. "I should clean up," she said. "I'm tracking snow everywhere." "You're fine," Ethan replied. Then, after a pause, "Bathroom's warm, take your time." As she moved down the hall, Ethan gathered another blanket and laid it over Rowan more securely. The dog opened one eye, then settled again, accepting the care without question. Clara returned several minutes later, her hair damp and pulled back loosely, her face less pale. She looked smaller without the weight of her coat, but also more at ease. She moved to the sofa and sat carefully, exhaling as she leaned back. "I don't usually stay places," she said. "I move around a lot." "Because of Rowan?" Ethan asked. "Because of everything," she replied. "People like to help at first. Then they get uncomfortable, or tired, or impatient." Ethan nodded. "Most people don't know what to do with things that last." She studied him for a moment. "You're different." "I'm used to quiet," he said simply. The radio on the counter crackled suddenly, breaking the stillness. Ethan moved toward it instinctively. "Unit 12, Sarah Quill's voice came through. "Storms expected to worsen. Non-essential travel suspended. You secure?" "Secure," Ethan replied. "Sheltered in." "Good," Sarah said. "Stay put. I'll check in later." Ethan turned the radio down. "Looks like we're stuck." Clara gave a small smile. "I've been stuck before." He returned the smile, faint but real. "This kind's temporary." Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows. Inside, the house held steady. Clara leaned down to rest her hand on Rowan's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. Ethan watched them, something unfamiliar stirring beneath the surface of his calm. The house, which had learned to exist without expectation, now held more than one life. It felt different, not fuller, not brighter, just occupied. And as the storm pressed on, Ethan realized that for the first time in a long while, he didn't mind the interruption. Morning arrived without ceremony. The storm did not end all at once, nor did the night retreat cleanly. Instead, the wind softened first, losing its sharp edge, and the snow fell straighter, quieter, as if the worst of its anger had already been spent. Pale light filtered through the living room window, dull and cold, turning the white outside into a flat, endless surface. Ethan woke before the house did. He sat up slowly on the armchair where he had slept, careful not to disturb the quiet. His back protested the night spent upright, but he ignored it. He had learned long ago not to negotiate with discomfort. He ran a hand over his beard, feeling the roughness of overnight growth, and stood, stretching just enough to loosen his shoulders. The house felt different in daylight, less guarded, still spare, still quiet, but no longer hollow. Rowan lay near the heater, wrapped in blankets, his chest rising and falling steadily. His ears flicked once as Ethan moved, then relaxed again. The dog's presence anchored the room in a way Ethan hadn't expected. Clara slept on the sofa, curled slightly toward Rowan. Her crutches leaned against the wall within reach. Without her coat and hat, she looked younger. The lines of strain eased from her face. Her auburn hair had come loose during the night, spreading across the cushion. Ethan noticed the faint crease between her brows even in sleep, a mark left by years of vigilance. He moved into the kitchen quietly and set a pan on the stove. Cooking was not something he did for comfort, but it was something he understood. Eggs, toast, coffee. Simple things done properly. The smell of coffee reached the living room before the sound did. Clara stirred, blinking awake, disoriented for a moment. Then her eyes found Rowan. Her shoulders loosened as relief replaced confusion. "Morning," Ethan said from the kitchen doorway. "Morning," she replied, pushing herself upright carefully. She winced, not dramatically, but honestly. "I forgot what it feels like to sleep without listening for wind." "It gets loud out there," Ethan said. She nodded. "And quiet in your head when it stops." Ethan brought her a mug of coffee, setting it on the table within reach. "Storm's easing," he said. "Roads will still be bad for a while." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "That's all right." They ate in companionable silence. No forced conversation, no need to explain themselves. Rowan lifted his head briefly when Ethan set a small bowl of water near him, then settled again. A knock sounded at the door, sharp against the quiet. Ethan stiffened immediately, instincts rising without effort. He moved to the door and opened it part way. A man stood on the porch, stamping snow from his boots. He was in his early 50s, tall but slightly stooped, with a weathered face framed by a thick gray beard. His hair was thinning beneath a knit cap, and his heavy jacket bore the faded emblem of the city's public works department. His eyes were kind but practical, the eyes of someone who had seen a lot of bad weather and worse decisions. "Morning, Hale," the man said. "Name's Frank Lawson, City Utilities." Ethan relaxed slightly. "Didn't expect inspections this early." Frank shrugged. "Storm took out a transformer 2 blocks down. We're checking houses on this line." His gaze shifted past Ethan, catching sight of Clara and Rowan. He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "You got power?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Steady all night." "Good," Frank replied. He nodded once, already satisfied. "You're lucky. Some folks weren't." He turned to leave, then paused. "Road'll open later today. Don't rush it." Ethan nodded. "Wasn't planning to." When the door closed, Clara exhaled softly. "He didn't look surprised to see us." "Frank's seen worse," Ethan said. "He knows better than to ask questions." She smiled faintly. "That's a useful skill." The radio crackled again, quieter now. Sarah Quill's voice came through, brisk but relieved. "Storm advisory lifted to caution. Roads reopening in stages. Unit 12, status check." Ethan picked up the handset. "All secure, no issues." "Copy," Sarah said. "Good work last night." The words landed heavier than she intended. Ethan set the radio down slowly. Clara watched him. "You don't like praise," she said. "I don't trust it," he replied. "Usually comes before expectations." She considered that. "And expectations lead to disappointment." "Or pressure," Ethan said. They sat with that truth for a moment. Later, Ethan cleared a path outside, shoveling the steps and a narrow strip of driveway. Clara watched from the window, Rowan's head resting against her leg. The way Ethan moved, steady, deliberate, reminded her of someone used to carrying responsibility without complaint. When he came back inside, snow dusting his shoulders, Clara spoke. "I should call someone." "Who?" Ethan asked. She hesitated. "I don't know yet." He nodded. "Take your time." That afternoon, they drove back to the veterinary clinic for a follow-up. Dr. Helen Moore checked Rowan again, satisfied with his progress. "He's tough," she said, patting the dog's shoulder. "Just like his owner." Clara smiled, genuine this time. On the way back, Clara said quietly, "I don't have a place to go." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "You can stay here until Rowan's stronger." She looked at him. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. They returned to the house as evening settled in, the sky clearing to a hard, pale blue. The storm had moved on, leaving the world quiet but altered. Snowbanks reshaped familiar lines. The road no longer looked the same. That night, Clara cooked dinner, slowly, carefully, but with confidence. She moved through the kitchen as if learning the space, adjusting to its limits. Ethan watched without comment, noticing how naturally she made room for herself. They ate together. Talk came easier now, small things, stories about Rowan as a puppy, Ethan's first winter on patrol. Laughter appeared briefly, unexpectedly, then faded without awkwardness. Later, as Clara settled Rowan for the night, she said, "You didn't have to let us stay." Ethan leaned against the doorway. "I know." "Then why did you?" He thought of the empty house before the storm, of the quiet that had pressed in for years. "Because," he said, "sometimes the right thing doesn't feel urgent. It just feels necessary." Clara nodded, understanding settling in her eyes. Outside, the night was calm. Inside, the house held 3 steady breaths. For now, that was enough. The days that followed did not announce themselves as important. They arrived quietly, one after another, shaped more by routine than by revelation. Snow remained piled along the edges of the streets, hardened now into uneven walls that reflected light in dull whites and grays. The storm had passed, but winter still owned the city, steady and unapologetic. Ethan returned to work in shorter shifts. City security had moved from emergency response to follow-up, checking damaged properties, clearing access routes, making sure people who lived alone hadn't been forgotten. He left early each morning and came back before dark, his movements unchanged, his habits intact. What had changed was the house. Clara stayed. At first, she treated the space like borrowed ground. She moved carefully, as if worried she might leave marks behind. She kept her belongings close, unpacked only what she needed. Rowan improved steadily, his injured leg stiff but usable, his appetite returning. He followed Clara everywhere, slow but determined, his presence a quiet assurance that he hadn't forgotten how close he'd come to being lost. Ethan noticed the small shifts before anything else. The kettle filled more often. Dishes appeared in the drying rack that he hadn't used in months. The living room no longer felt like a place that waited. It felt occupied. One afternoon, Clara asked if she could help with the shoveling. "You don't have to," Ethan said. "I want to," she replied, already reaching for her coat. They worked in silence, Ethan clearing the heavier drifts, Clara managing the edges and steps, moving carefully but efficiently. She had learned how to measure effort, how to avoid waste. When she rested, she did so without apology. "You do this a lot," Ethan said eventually. "Adapt?" she asked. "Yes," she nodded. "You stop thinking of it as something you lost. You think of it as something you manage." Ethan considered that. "That takes discipline. It takes time," she corrected. Later that evening, a car pulled into the driveway. Ethan recognized it immediately. A dark sedan, clean despite the weather, its headlights cutting sharply through the dim. He didn't move right away. "Someone you know?" Clara asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "From before." The knock came firm and deliberate. When Ethan opened the door, a man stood on the porch, removing his gloves with careful precision. He was in his late 40s, tall and broad through the chest, wearing a wool coat that fit well but showed signs of regular use. His hair was dark, cut short, and his beard, salt and pepper and neatly trimmed, framed a face marked by sharp cheekbones and a mouth that rarely smiled without reason. His eyes were brown, observant, the kind that weighed a room quickly. "Ethan," the man said, "thought I'd find you here." "Jonah," Ethan replied. Jonah Pierce had been a lieutenant on the force before Ethan retired. He was known for his composure, his insistence on procedure, and his habit of speaking plainly even when others softened the truth. He stepped inside, glancing briefly toward Clara and Rowan, then back to Ethan. "Didn't mean to interrupt," Jonah said, "but you've been listed as an emergency contact for 3 welfare cases this week. Wanted to make sure you were actually back." "I am," Ethan said, "just not sleeping at the station anymore." Jonah nodded, then looked at Clara again. "You must be Clara." She straightened slightly. "Yes." "I'm Jonah," he said, "friend of Ethan's, or what passes for it." Clara offered a small smile. "Nice to meet you." Jonah's gaze dropped briefly to Rowan, who watched him calmly. "Good dog," Jonah said, approving. "Looks like he's earned the right to rest." "He has," Clara replied. Jonah turned back to Ethan. "There's talk," he said quietly, "about reopening a community outreach unit, non-uniform, training and support. Your name came up." Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm not going back. I didn't say back, Jonah replied. I said involved. Silence settled between them. Clara shifted, sensing the weight of the moment. She excused herself, moving toward the kitchen with Rowan following at a careful pace. Jonah lowered his voice. You don't have to decide now, but you should know the door isn't closed. I know, Ethan said. Jonah studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good, that's all. He left without lingering, his presence brief but impactful. That night, Clara asked about him. He believes people should keep serving until they're empty, Ethan said. And you don't? She asked. I think some people serve better after they've stopped trying to prove something. She considered that. I think you're still serving, he looked at her. By letting you stay? By not looking away, she said. The days continued. Clara began sketching again, using a small notebook she'd kept tucked in her bag. She drew Rowan sleeping, the outline of the house, the way snow bent tree branches outside the window. Ethan watched her work one evening, the focus in her expression reminding him of something he'd lost track of. What do you do with those? He asked. Sometimes nothing, she replied. Sometimes they turn into something useful. Like what? Books, illustrations, things people hold on to. Ethan nodded. That sounds right. A few nights later, the power flickered briefly, then steadied. The house held. They sat by the window, watching the snow fall lightly. Nothing like the storm that had brought them together. You won't stay forever, Ethan said eventually. It wasn't a question. No, Clara said, but I won't leave unfinished either. Rowan lifted his head at her voice, tail thumping once against the floor. Outside, the city moved on, roads reopening, routines reestablished. Inside, the house continued to adjust, making room without asking questions. And Ethan understood something then, not sharply, not all at once, but steadily. Some things didn't arrive to stay forever. They arrived to change the shape of what remained. The first clear morning after a long stretch of gray arrived quietly. The sky held a pale blue that looked almost fragile, as if it might break if examined too closely. Sunlight touched the snowbanks along the street and revealed how uneven they had become. Layers built by storms, reshaped by plows, hardened by time. The city moved again, cautiously, like someone testing a leg after a long injury. Ethan stood at the kitchen window, mug warming his hands, watching a city bus struggle up the incline 2 blocks away. He knew that road. He had stood there more than once in the past, directing traffic when weather turned careless people into risks. He knew how things moved when winter loosened its grip, and how quickly they could tighten again. Behind him, the house carried familiar sounds now, the soft scrape of a chair, the low clink of a spoon against a bowl, Rowan's steady breathing, stronger every day, a rhythm that had worked its way into the background like a second clock. Clara sat at the table, her sketchbook opened, his pencil moving in small, deliberate strokes. She wore a thick sweater and jeans, her prosthetic set neatly beneath the table. Her auburn hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling free when she leaned forward. The lines in her face had softened since the storm, but her attention remained sharp. She drew with the focus of someone who didn't waste effort. Ethan turned from the window. "Roads are clear enough now," he said. "If you need to head out." She didn't look up right away. "I know." The words hung there, heavier than either of them wanted to admit. Later that morning, the phone rang. Ethan recognized the number before he answered. "Pierce," he said. Jonah's voice came through steady and controlled. "I won't keep you long. Community center meeting tonight. Informal, just listening, no commitments." Ethan glanced toward Clara. "I'll think about it." "That's all I'm asking," Jonah replied, then paused. "For what it's worth, people remember you. In a good way." After the call ended, Ethan set the phone down slowly. "Is that the door you don't want to open?" Clara asked. He considered the question. "It's not the door," he said. "It's what happens if I walk through it." She nodded. Sometimes leaving something behind feels heavier than staying. The words stayed with him longer than she intended. That afternoon, another car pulled into the driveway. This one was older, paint dulled by winters, tires crunching cautiously over packed snow. A man stepped out, tall and narrow, shoulders sloped from years of work rather than age. He wore a brown work coat, its seams worn thin, and a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. His hair was dark but thinning, and a short, uneven beard framed a face that looked permanently uncertain, as if he expected trouble even on quiet days. Clara stiffened as she saw him through the window. "That's Aaron," she said, My uncle. Ethan watched her carefully. You want me here? Yes, she said without hesitation. Aaron Whitmore knocked softly, then stepped back, hands shoved into his coat pockets. When Ethan opened the door, Aaron offered a tight smile. Didn't mean to show up unannounced, Aaron said. His voice carried a nervous edge. I've been trying to track her down. She's safe, Ethan said evenly. Come in. Aaron hesitated before stepping inside. His eyes moved quickly around the room, taking in Rowan on his blanket, the sketchbook on the table, the signs of shared space. He swallowed. Clara moved forward on her crutches, posture straight. What do you want, Aaron? Aaron's gaze dropped briefly, then returned. Your aunt's been asking questions, he said, not in a good way. Clara's jaw tightened. She doesn't get to anymore. I know, Aaron replied quickly. That's why I came. Ruth, she doesn't bend, but she's still family. Family doesn't throw someone into a storm, Clara said. Her voice stayed calm, but the words cut clean. Aaron nodded, shame flickering across his face. I didn't stop it, he said. I should have. Silence filled the room. Rowan shifted, sensing the tension, and rested his head against Clara's leg. Aaron glanced at Ethan. You must be Ethan. Yes. Thank you, Aaron said simply, for keeping her alive. Ethan met his gaze. She did that herself. Aaron looked back at Clara. I can help you get set up somewhere. I've got a spare apartment above the shop. It's not much, but it's warm. Clara didn't answer right away. She looked around the house, the lamp by the chair, the quiet corners that no longer felt empty. Rowan breathing steadily beside her. I appreciate it, she said finally. But I'm not ready. Aaron nodded, relief and disappointment mixing in his expression. When you are, he said, you know how to find me. He left without pressing further, his shoulders slightly hunched as he walked back to his car. That evening, Ethan drove to the community center. The building was old, brick darkened by decades of weather. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows. A handful of people stood talking quietly. Retired officers, social workers, volunteers. Jonah stood near the front, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, his presence steady and familiar. Ethan took a seat in the back. He listened as people spoke about gaps in service, about the kind of work that didn't make headlines, about showing up early and staying late, about knowing when to listen instead of act. The room felt honest, not demanding, not nostalgic. Jonah caught Ethan's eye once and nodded, no pressure. When Ethan returned home, the house was lit warmly. Clara sat on the sofa, Rowan beside her, a blanket over both of them. She looked up as Ethan came in. You went, she said. I listened, he replied. She smiled slightly. That counts. They sat together, the quiet between them no longer uncertain. Outside, night settled in gently, without threat. Later, as Clara prepared for bed, she paused in the doorway. I should tell you something, she said. Ethan waited. I won't stay forever, she said. I don't want to build something on borrowed ground. I know, he said, but I don't want to leave like I ran either. Ethan nodded. Then don't. She exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders. Rowan let out a soft sound, settling deeper into his blanket. The house stood steady around them, holding the weight of what had been said and what hadn't. Some endings announced themselves loudly, others arrived quietly, disguised as choices. And tonight, no one chose to walk away. The next morning did not rush them. The light outside arrived slowly, pale and deliberate, slipping between the bare branches and resting on the snow like something placed there with care. The city sounded different now, not silent, not loud, just awake. Somewhere down the block, a car door closed. Farther off, a snowplow moved with less urgency than before, scraping what remained rather than fighting what was still falling. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, trimming his beard with a steady hand. The mirror above the sink showed a man who looked much the same as he had weeks ago, but the stillness in his posture had changed. He no longer stood as if bracing for impact. He stood as if he had already absorbed it and found his balance again. Behind him, the house moved gently. Clara was up, moving from room to room with a quiet familiarity that no longer felt borrowed. She had pulled her hair back loosely, a few strands already slipping free. She wore a long-sleeved shirt and jeans, her prosthetic fitted carefully, her movements confident but unhurried. Rowan followed her at a measured pace, his limp barely noticeable now, his tail swinging low and steady. Ethan turned from the mirror. You're up early? Clara smiled faintly. I've always liked mornings after hard nights. Why's that? They feel honest, she said. Nothing's pretending anymore. They ate breakfast together, simple and unremarkable. Toast, eggs, coffee poured twice. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. The air between them held enough understanding to rest on. Afterward, Clara gathered her sketchbook and sat near the window. She had been drawing more over the last few days, not with urgency, but with intention. Today, her pencil moved differently, slower, more deliberate. She sketched the line of the street as it curved away from the house, the way the snowbanks narrowed it, the subtle resilience in the scene. Ethan watched from across the room, recognizing the focus. It was the same look he'd worn once when he believed he could plan his way through anything. The knock on the door came mid-morning. This time, it wasn't unexpected. Ethan opened the door to find a man in his late 60s standing on the porch. He was tall, but slightly bent at the shoulders, his posture shaped by years of work rather than age. His face was narrow, weathered, framed by a thick white beard, trimmed neatly but without vanity. He wore a wool coat that had seen better decades and a cap pulled low over thinning gray hair. His eyes were sharp, curious, and kind in equal measure. "Ethan Hale," the man said. "I hoped I'd catch you." "That depends," Ethan replied calmly, "on who's asking." The man smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "Martin Keller. I run the North Shore Community Arts Center." Ethan stepped aside. "Come in." Martin entered slowly, taking in the room without judgment. His gaze lingered briefly on Clara's drawings spread across the table. He stopped there, studying them with open interest. "These yours?" he asked her. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Martin leaned closer, careful not to touch. "You don't rush lines," he said. "That tells me more than the subject." Clara blinked, surprised. "Most people tell me what they see, not how it's made." Martin chuckled. "Most people don't know how to look." He straightened and turned to Ethan. "I was told you might be hosting someone with a talent worth protecting." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "By whom?" "Jonah Pierce," Martin said. "He worries about people, even the ones who say they don't need it." Ethan exhaled slowly. "That sounds like him." Martin nodded. "I'm putting together a small exhibition in spring, local stories, quiet ones. I'd like Clara to consider contributing. No pressure, just an invitation." Clara's hand tightened slightly around her pencil. "I don't show my work," she said. "Then don't," Martin replied easily. "But don't hide it either. There's a difference." He handed her a simple card, cream-colored, unadorned. "Think about it." After he left, the house felt charged in a way it hadn't before. Clara sat down slowly. "I wasn't ready for that." "No one ever is," Ethan said. "That doesn't mean it's wrong." She studied the card for a long moment, then slipped it into her sketchbook without comment. That afternoon, Clara asked to walk. "Just to the corner," she said. "I want to feel the ground out on again." Ethan grabbed his coat without hesitation. They moved slowly, Rowan between them, the leash slack. The street felt narrower than it had weeks ago, shaped by ice and memory. Clara paused halfway down the block, breathing deeply. "I could stay," she said suddenly, "longer than planned." Ethan didn't answer right away. He didn't want her words to feel answered by need. "You could," he said finally, "but only if it's a choice, not a shelter." She nodded. "That's what scares me." They reached the corner and turned back. Sometimes, the act of returning was enough. That evening, Jonah Pierce called again. His voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Keller came by?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Good," Jonah replied. "Means you were both being seen." Ethan looked at Clara across the room. "We are." Later, as night settled in, Clara packed her bag. Not hurriedly, carefully. She folded her clothes with intention, placed her sketchbook on top, Rowan watching every movement. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "You leaving tonight?" "No," she said. "Tomorrow." He nodded. "Where?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know how I'll leave." He waited. "Not running," she said, "and not disappearing." They stood there for a long moment. Then Ethan spoke, quietly. "I don't know what shape tomorrow takes, for either of us." Clara met his gaze. "But you're not afraid of it anymore." "No," he said, "I'm not." That night, the house slept easily. No storm pressed at the windows, no wind demanded attention. Just 3 steady breaths and the quiet understanding that some chapters ended not with certainty, but with readiness. Morning would come, and whatever followed would be chosen. Sometimes we wait for miracles to arrive loudly. We expect them to look like answers falling from the sky or storms stopping all at once. But most miracles don't come that way. Most of the time, they arrive quietly. They come as a stranger who chooses not to drive past, as a door that opens on the coldest night, as a moment when someone stays, when leaving would have been easier. Maybe that is how God works more often than we realize. Not by removing the storm, but by placing the right soul on the road at the exact moment another can no longer walk alone. In our daily lives, we pray for strength, for clarity, for relief. And sometimes we don't hear an answer right away, but often the answer comes through people, through small acts of courage, through kindness that doesn't ask for recognition, through the decision to show up when no one is watching. If this story found its way to your heart, maybe it's because you've stood in that cold place too, tired, carrying more than anyone could see, wondering if help would ever come. Let this be your reminder today. You are not forgotten. You are not walking alone. Even in the hardest season, God is still working quietly in your life. If this story brought you comfort, please share it with someone who might need hope tonight. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We would love to hear your story. And if you believe in stories of healing, second chances, and quiet miracles, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue this journey together. May God bless you. May He keep you safe. And may you always find light, even when the road ahead feels buried in snow. Amen.